Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is David and today we have something very special on the workbench. A few days ago a friend of mine asked me if I could replicate a wallet he has been using for quite some time. He said he bought it on a trip to Italy at a flea market and hasn't found a similar one since. You can tell this wallet is completely beaten up, the snap doesn't work anymore and the lining has separated from the main parts. You can even see some cardboard inside the wallet between the leathers and the lining, which by the way is a very common practice in many other commercial leather goods. He wanted the new wallet to be as similar as possible to the original since he fell in love with the style and design. I suggested using some Badalassi Carlo Minerva box leather for this project because it would look very similar to the original texture leather, and since this is a vegetable tan leather, it will patina dramatically over time. The wallet itself has a very complex arrangement, so I decided to start with the easiest part first, which is the snap strap, and then move on to the interior section. For this part I'll use some navy and dark brown leathers. These leathers were split down to 0.5 millimeters each, so they're almost like paper since this wallet will require a ton of layers. First we need to cut some small pieces of these colors and glue them together, and then hammer them carefully to make them as thin and smooth as possible. I then cut the assembly to the right measurements of the strap and rounded one edge with a penny and my X-Acto knife. Next, I use a wing divider to measure the distance where the stitching line will sit and use my pricking irons to gently mark where the stitching holes will go. I don't want to perforate the leather right away since when I've done that before, the leather has torn down while saddle stitching. So instead, I'll just mark the stitching line and then use a diamond tip scratch awl to make the stitching holes individually. This will leave enough space between each stitch to avoid the leathers from tearing while stitching. Before stitching the strap, I applied a single coat of dark brown edge paint and then used some linen thread to saddle stitch this piece, leaving the rectangular section on the square side untouched to be stitched to the wallet later on. Once finished stitching the strap, we can flatten the thread carefully with a leather hammer. This will also give the piece a smooth and even feel to the touch, and we won't feel the height of every stitch when using it. I then applied a second coat of edge paint and let the piece dry for around 20 minutes before installing the snap. Since this wallet has such a complex arrangement, it took me quite a while to fully understand it. I had to go through several rounds of trial and error, which, as you'll see later on, was extremely frustrating. However, I feel fortunate to have the opportunity to craft a piece like this. It not only allows me to show you the entire process and highlight what to watch out for when you're crafting similar items, but it also helped me push the boundaries of my skills, a crucial aspect on working on bespoke leather projects. Moving on with the wallet, the next step was to work on the smaller card slots on the interior. Since the entire wallet was going to be lined with the same leather, I cut large pieces of both colors, glued them together, and then cut out rectangles for the slots. In hindsight, this was my first mistake, not double checking the arrangement of the wallet and its sections. I crafted the inner section as I normally would for other projects, but eventually hit a roadblock and had to backtrack. For now, I focus on cutting and painting the edges of the slots.
Fragile ears, the heart of the man, naked as the morning breeze. Fragile ears, the heart of the man, finally revealed, ready to heal. Still as delay in the early morning hours, my heart feels safe wherever it wanders. Sometimes they're made to be broken. No more straight lines. Heaven's gate. Let me be there in time. Fragile is the heart of the man, naked as the morning breeze. Fragile is the heart of the man, finally revealed, ready to heal.
To stitch the edges, I used 3 different colors of linen thread: blue, black, and light brown. I wanted to give the wallet contrasting stitching similar to the original, but only where it was highly visible. For the rest of the stitches, I matched the thread to the leather color.
As long as our love it doesn't become a prison, I'll be back to our nest. Back for the back.
One notable characteristic of the original wallet is that despite having numerous card slots, it was still quite thin. The original design used fabric instead of leather, allowing the manufacturer to fold certain sections without adding bulk. Since I was working with leather, I used a different strategy to minimize thickness. I trimmed 6mm of leather from the sides of the inner slots so that each slot could sit at the same level as the one below it. This is a common practice in wallet making to create the illusion of thinness. I then marked the stitching holes with my pricking irons and used a diamond-tipped scratch awl to punch them through the leather. While joining the first two slots, I noticed an excess of leather on the second slot, so I carefully trimmed it with an X-Acto knife. Once both pieces were stitched together, I painted the edges with Vernice Heatable Edge Paint in brown. I applied 2 coats and then polished the edges using burnishing gum for a smooth finished look. Next, it was time to work on the larger section of the inner part. In the original wallet, this section is primarily red with a small blue piece on one end. I decided to stitch these 2 colored leather pieces to a larger blue section from behind, which would eventually serve as the front face of the large bill slot. To press the glued leather pieces, I used a small scrap of leather and my fingers, applying pressure to ensure the glue set evenly. Once everything had dried, I used a wing divider to mark the stitching lines and proceeded to stitch the leather to the larger bill slot section. Next, we need to create the third slot using the same dimensions as the second one, since it will be hidden from the edge and stitched to the larger side. I trimmed 6 mm from both sides to ensure the slots aligned at the same thickness. For the edge, I used Max Edge Basic Edge Paint from Giardini, which I purchased from the buckle guy, and followed the same process as with the other pieces. Applying 2 coats of paint, polishing with burnishing gum, and stitching the edge with light brown linen thread to complement the Olmo colored leather. After measuring the distance of the slot from the original wallet, I knew how far I needed to stitch this piece from the edge of the larger compartment and went ahead with stitching it. However, once I finished, I realized I had made a huge mistake. If you're familiar with leatherworking, you might have seen this coming. Because the previous assembly was already stitched and the new orange slot helps the last card to stick properly, there was an open space between the card slots. In a setup where the cards slide outwards, this wouldn't be a problem since the slots could be stitched together along the edge of the build compartment. But with this configuration, the cards could easily fall through the open space. This was extremely frustrating, but after reviewing my work, I had no choice but to unstitch the wallet and salvage what I could from the already glued pieces. I should have anticipated this, but thankfully there was a solution. As you can see, the key was to stitch the entire assembly of card slots first before attaching it to the large build compartment. To fix it, I started by creating the larger card slot and worked my way down to the smallest one, which is positioned near the center of the wallet. Since this added significant thickness to the edge of the assembly, I use my Dremel to sand off any excess of glue and leather before painting and polishing the edges of the hidden card slot compartment. After that, I mark the stitching holes on the assemblies and glue them to the build compartment. Once the pieces were glued and dried, we need to deepen the stitching hole so we can saddle stitch the wallet comfortably along the upper side of the compartment. This is the side where the bills will enter. The leather is quite thin, so while we can punch the holes with a pricking iron, this could make the holes too large and risk damaging the leather during stitching. To avoid this, I use a scratch awl to make each hole individually. Once the front part was stitched and the upper edge painted and polished, I glued the sides of both card slot assemblies to the larger panel while focusing on the outer part of the wallet. The outer section, though different from the inner, follows a similar method with overlapping leather pieces like the card slots. In this case, it's best to start with the large build compartment first, then stitch the outermost card slot to it before moving on to the second slot and the large centerpiece. I'll be back to show you the centerpiece assembly. Meanwhile, the card slots follow the same process, lining the leathers together, painting the edges, and stitching them onto the large compartment. Great, now that all the car slots have been assembled, it's time to create the final piece, which is the center one. This part is actually quite tricky to make. To start, we can't simply measure the space where the piece will sit and cut the leather to that size because this section will be folding frequently. I made this mistake earlier with the piece you see here, thinking the thinness of the leather wouldn't be an issue, but once I folded the wallet, it left a large gap between the car slots, so I had to cut the piece again. Additionally, we need to account for the thickness of this piece to avoid any unnecessary tension of the stitches and the leather. Finally, this piece must include 2 hidden car slots and have the snap and strap installed, making it more challenging than the rest of the wallet. To manage this, we'll use a single layer of leather for the outer part and add the car slots separately on each side, ensuring we don't add unnecessary bulk. This outer section is the first thing people will notice, so it's crucial to keep the thickness in check. After cutting the leather piece, I folded the wallet as if it were completely closed to determine the exact length and then trimmed the outer piece accordingly. I installed the first car slot on one side, stitching and painting the edge once finished, and used the original wallet's measurements to guide the placement of the strap. I followed the same process on the other side where the snap would be placed. I prepped the stitching holes to join the pieces together without bending the wallet too much, ensuring the alignment by using the visible stitching holes as a reference. Then I attached the car slot to one side of the assembly, carefully measuring its position to stitch only the back side to the build compartment. Once that's done, we can move on to the centerpiece, making the hole for the snap, stitching the brown piece to the assembly, and finally securing the brown part to the center section. With that, all the car slots of the wallet are now complete. Once the centerpiece is attached to the outer assembly, we can install the snap by punching the pre-marked hole through the car slot and using specialized tools for snap installation. This is the moment of truth. If the snap isn't installed correctly, we might have to start over with this piece. Fortunately, the snap fit perfectly, so we can move on to stitching the upper side of the assembly. Always be sure to double check that you're stitching the correct side. I kept the original wallet beside the new one to verify everything was aligned properly. To start, glue all the edges of the side you're stitching and let the glue dry before punching the stitching holes along the edge.
As long as the wind
For the outer stitching, I'll be using light brown thread to match the original design. Since this edge is much thicker than the car slots, it's important to ensure it's completely even before applying any edge paint. I used a Dremel and a 220 grit sandpaper and then carefully applied 3 coats of heatable edge paint.
I'm in peace with myself now. It took me a while. I'm in peace for my mistakes. It was about time.
After letting it dry for about an hour, I polished the edge with some Tokonole burnishing gum and a small piece of canvas.
Naked as the morning breeze, fragile is the heart of man, finally revealed, ready to heal.
For the lower part of the assembly, we only need to stitch the small section in the middle that allows the bills to fit comfortably.
Still as delay in the early morning hours, my heart feels safe wherever it wanders. Of times they're made to be broken. No more straight lines. Heaven's gate. Let me be there in time. Fragile is the heart of the man.
I used office clamps to hold everything up while the glue dried for 20 minutes. After that, I marked the limits of the small section and used a wing divider, pricking iron and scratch awl to prepare the stitching holes and then saddle stitch this section.
As long as the wind blows through my hair, I'll keep singing for love to be shared. I'm in peace with myself now. It took me a while. I'm in peace for my mistakes. It was about time. Fragile is the heart of the man, naked as the morning breeze. Fragile is the heart of the man, finally revealed, ready to heal. Still as the lake
Finally, it was time to join both assemblies together. We're just a few stitching runs and edge finishes away from completing the wallet. My friend also requested his initials on one of the inner card slots. I began by gluing both assemblies together on one side and held them in place until the glue dried. At this point, we need to ensure the edges are well aligned before gluing them together again. The office clamps come in handy for this task.
Let me be there in time. Fragile is the heart.
Once the glue dried, I made each individual stitching hole with my scratch awl, paying particular attention to the strap underneath the leather layers. I then saddle stitched this side of the wallet, focusing on keeping the sides aligned tightly before moving on to the remaining part.
As long as our love it doesn't become a prison, I'll be back to our nest. Back foot and back.
For the final steps, I glued all the sides of the card slots, clamped them in place, and sanded down any excess glue and leather using my Dremel. I saddle stitch this side, apply 3 coats of paint to the edge and polish it with a wooden slicker and varnishing gum. After finishing with the Dremel, I bevel the edges to smooth out the layers of leather. I also use a plastic bone folder to clean out any remaining glue between the car slots. And after this long but exciting process, here's the final result, our completed wallet with 12 car slots and a spacious build compartment. So friends, as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video enjoyable and informative. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more leather crafting content like this. I'll be crafting another identical wallet in navy blue, so be sure to hit the notification bell to be the first to know when it's posted. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a great day.